I wonder often if there's any relationship between guilt and gold, that the love of money is the root of evil. Because you see, is that a job is some unpleasant work you do in order to make money, with the sole purpose of making money. There are plenty of jobs because there is still a certain amount of dirty work that nobody wants to do, and that therefore they will pay someone to do it. But if you do a job with the sole purpose of making money, you are absurd. Because if money becomes the goal, and it does when you work that way, you begin increasingly to confuse it with happiness or with pleasure. It goes back, you see, to the ancient guilt that if you don't work, you have no right to eat. That if there are others in the world who don't have enough to eat, you shouldn't enjoy your dinner even though you have no possible means of conveying the food to them. While it is true that we are all one human family and that every individual involves every other individual, the one way of not doing anything about a situation is feeling guilty about it. Because when people feel guilty about a situation, do all kinds of things which will be ways of actually not doing anything about the problem, but feeling all right about it instead. It is a destructive emotion. Walt Whitman always admired animals because they do not lie awake at night and weep for their sins. Our animals are practical in the real sense. If you have done something wrong or you have made a mistake, and somebody makes you ashamed of it and guilty, you run around licking the sores of your wounded ego because you feel your pride has been hurt. It is not a serious failing in a human being to make mistakes. You can't learn anything unless you make mistakes. I know a very great anthropologist who was taught music, playing the piano, in the same way I was. The school mom who taught me used to put an eraser on the top of each hand so that I would have my hands in good posture. And every time I'd play a wrong note, she'd hit my fingers with a pencil. And this great anthropologist had had a similar sort of musical education. And when confronted with the piano in the presence of an absolutely marvelous teacher in San Francisco, he said she was amazed. He was completely incapable of reading notes. He blocked at everything. Another great teacher of the piano I knew said simply, "You must not be afraid of playing wrong notes. Just forget it. Play it wrong. And then eventually go over it again and you'll eventually get it right. But you must not block. Always keep the same rhythm going, even if you have to slow it down, but keep the proportionate rhythm of one note to another. And if it's the wrong note, play the wrong note, as long as you play something." So, you know, this is a way of taking away people's blockage, people's guilt and shame about making mistakes. Freedom means, basically, the freedom to make mistakes. And then not to recriminate with yourself when you do finally realize that it was a mistake, but simply don't do it again. Human behavior, at its deepest level, is completely harmonious with the order of the universe. By seeing that the good things and the evil things that human beings do are just like the behavior of other creatures, animals, insects, worms, fish, and flowers, and that the good side has to have the bad side to balance it, so that you know that it's good. In the words of the Taoist sage Zhuangzi, and those who speak of good behavior without the presence of its opposite, bad behavior, do not understand the great principles of the universe. It is as if they could have the yang without the yin, the positive without the negative. Now that's a saying which really sets us back, because we Westerners are dedicated to the abolition of evil. If we solve certain economic problems, for example, and we have a world where people are not committed to drudgery, we shall discover social evil in some new form. It's exactly the same as when you're worried sick about money, and are you going to make the payments on the house and the car and all that, the insurance. You think, if only I could have a lot more money, I'd be so happy. And then somehow you get it. And for a few days you're ecstatic and walking on air. Then you suddenly realize that you might get sick, or that someone, the government or burglars or something, might take your money away from you. And you start worrying about that with just the same intensity as you had formerly worried about not having enough money. So you see, when I would say one of the great philosophical questions is, are we going to make it? Because this is the situation of the cosmos. Look at a star. A star is a great burst of fire. See? Well, the question is how far to go. The fire goes out and out and out and out and out, and then suddenly it begins to fade, the energy falls away, and there's darkness. Because if there isn't a point, you see, where the light gives up, or the radiance gives up, it fills everything, and therefore has no way of realizing itself, because you can only realize light by the contrast of darkness. And that's why, then, you, as a ray which shoots out of the Godhead, will say, are we going to make it? In other words, how long a ray are you going to be? And some people think, well, if I'm only a short ray, it's not really a great success. I want to be a long ray. I want to live till I'm 90, or maybe 100, get longer and longer. See, if you look at some sort of stellar form object, it adds great interest to it if its rays are of unequal length. If they're all equal, it looks sort of flat and mechanical. But by having all sorts of different lengths, as you find them in some of those gorgeous radiolaria creatures that are minute animalcules of the ocean, there's a certain balance of length, there's a certain average which gives it a globular form, but many different lengths in the stems. Are we going to make it? This is always the question. But then you're not going to make it at a certain point. The ray finishes, and we call that death. But you are actually not the ray so much as the source of the ray. That's where you are really. And the source doesn't vanish. You see, the source is there always. But it's shooting out, shooting out, shooting out, and then vanishes. If you remember, therefore, that at every stage of the universe, you are basically in the same situation. For the reason that everybody is basically the divine being, working out the panorama of its life in myriads of different ways. And these differences of ways require spectra of many kinds. There's the spectrum of color, there's the spectrum of tones, but there is also the spectrum of orders of being. So that from the most minute animalcules right up through all kinds of animals, through human beings of every grade to the gods, you have a great spectrum. And just as at one end of the spectrum you have purple, and at the other you have red. But now look, what is purple? Purple is blue mixed with red. The spectrum goes right the way around. If we say that the purple end, like the deeps of the waters, are the very primitive forms of life, and the red, the most radiant. If you see the spectrum as a circle, they join. In nature, then, one has this seamless order where every point on it is central. and therefore feels in the same situation, envying those above and pitying those below.